Well, greetings, community group leaders and teachers and members. This is the teaching series extra for April 22nd as we continue our series called Stranger Days, teaching through the book of 1 Peter. And this week we're finishing chapter 1. In chapter 1, it functions kind of like a sermon from Peter as he introduces this letter. The first section that we saw, Peter answers the question of who are you as Christians, and as Peter's writing to the Christians that are dispersed across Asia Minor, he reminds them their identity is those who are born again into a living hope, and that identity means two things. Number one, that they're chosen by God. They are the object of His covenant love, that He has chosen them in Christ. And then the second is that they're exiles in the world, and so this world is not their home, and so the feeling that they're strangers or the suffering that they're going through is therefore not unusual because they are exiles. And then in the second section, which we looked at last week, Paul turns to their circumstances. And instead of answering the question, who are you, he answers, why can I rejoice, even in the midst of hard times? And that might not seem intuitive. As exiles, why should they be rejoicing? And so Paul walks through why they can rejoice despite the fact that they're exiles, because of all they have in Christ and because God is architecting their lives and what they're suffering for their good, for the development of their faith, to refine them, and so they can trust in Him. And so now, after introducing who they are and why they can rejoice, in this last half of the chapter, Paul turns to imperatives. He begins to tell them how they should be living. About 35% of our country in the United States, about 1 in 3 people, identify as a born-again Christian. So a good thing to maybe do in your community groups this week is to ask the question, what should that look like to be a born-again Christian? 1 out of every 3 people in this country identify as a born-again Christian. What should that look like? And that's really the subject of these verses. And so we're going to walk through 4 imperatives that Peter gives to the church. The first one is to set their hope on the grace of God. And so that comes right out of their identity as those who are born again, because he said they're born again into a living hope. And so the essence of being born again is that we've seen God and we put our hope in Him. And then the second 2 imperatives kind of go together. It's be holy in all of your conduct, and then conduct yourself with fear. So the command of the mind was hope in the Lord, but the command to the will is be holy in all your conduct, and in all your conduct conduct yourself with fear of the Lord. And so both of those are really the way in which you live, the things in which you're doing should be consistent with the relationship that you have with God and His nature. And then the last imperative that he gives is to love one another earnestly from the heart. So I command to the mind, these 2 commands to the will, and then this last command to love one another from the heart. And these commands proceed all from our identity as being born again. We're born again into that living hope of Jesus. It begins to shape the way we live, and that begins to change the love that we have, not only for God, but for those around us. And so we begin to love earnestly from the heart. And so this is very typical for Peter. Even in his second letter, he talks about supplementing your faith, supplementing with your faith, holiness leading to love. So that's what we're going to be talking about this week, that we, as those who are born again in Christ, should have our minds set on hope. We should be living in holiness, and we should be living out love. So I hope that's a good discussion for you in your community groups, and we'll be praying for you and your groups that God blesses your time this Sunday together.